Welcome to the exam prep for the Azure AI Apps and Agents Developer Associate Certification. This is a brand new certification, and passing it proves you can confidently take over everything from building AI apps to deploying intelligent agents on Azure. Whether you come from a dev background, a data role, or you're just getting started with AI, this will guide you through exactly what you need to know for exam day. So let's get started. I'm Georgia Kalyva, a lead technical trainer here at Microsoft, an author who loves making cloud concepts simple, practical, and fun to learn. I spent years as a Microsoft AI MVP and international speaker working in cloud technologies, AI, and cybersecurity, and specializing in designing and implementing secure and scalable solutions. This exam is designed for those with hands-on experience designing, developing, and deploying advanced Azure AI solutions using Python and Microsoft Foundry. And you should have a little bit of familiarity with the capabilities of AI in general, generative AI, and Azure services, including self-paced training through Microsoft Learn. Think of this exam prep as your final review. This video is your comprehensive guide to exam preparation, covering essential topics and providing valuable study resources. Once you feel confident in your understanding of the content, it's time to take the exam. Now let's start with our material. This slide breaks down the 5 objective domains, each with a specific weight. Generative AI and agents is the biggest weight at 30 to 35%, so make sure you spend some time there. Planning and managing an Azure AI solution comes next at 25 to 30. Computer vision, text analysis, and information extraction each carry 10 to 15%. Every skill matters. But if you're short on time, prioritize the heavier weighted areas first. In this exam prep video, we're going to focus on 3 key things. First, helping you clearly understand what will be covered on the exam so there are no surprises. Second, giving you practical insights on how to prepare effectively based on what really matters. And third, helping you identify which concepts you should prioritize or visit so you can focus your study time where it will make the biggest impact. Remember, this exam prep session is not a replacement for official Microsoft training or your hands-on experience. While we will guide you on what to expect in the exam, we won't teach the topics in detail. Use it to spot any knowledge gaps and focus your time and resources accordingly. Ask yourself, as we are going through the concepts, if I was presented with a scenario, would I be able to answer how to apply it effectively using the best practices? All right, let's start with the objective domain 1, which is all about planning and managing your Azure AI solution. This covers choosing the right services, setting things up in Foundry, keeping everything secure, and making sure your AI behaves responsibly. It is 25 to 30% of the exam, so getting comfortable here is not optional. It is essential. Here are the detailed skills for domain 1. Not every item will appear on your exam, but any of them could. You need to know how to pick the right models and services, design the infrastructure, handle deployments, lock things down with managed identities and role-based access control, and bake responsible AI into every layer. Treat this as your study checklist for this entire domain. Microsoft Foundry is the home base for all your AI work on Azure. Think of it as your one-stop shop for building, testing, and deploying generative AI apps with enterprise-grade guardrails. Make sure you can identify when Foundry is the right answer for a scenario, so make sure you understand what it does and what makes it different from the standalone services. The model catalog is extensive. Choosing the right model family is a skill that you need to build both for the exam and real-life scenarios. Large language models handle generation and reasoning. Embedding models power search and retrieval. Multimodal models work across text, images, and so much more. When you see a scenario question, your first job is to match the task to the right model type. When choosing models, sometimes it is not just one model, but a whole category of models. For chatbots and summarization, they point to text generation models. Code completion points to code models. Image generation is its own category. The exam might describe a business need, and you need to figure out which model fits. So practice thinking in terms of use case first, model second. A term very tied to generative AI is RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. RAG is an architectural pattern used for what we call grounding. This is when the answers need to come from your own data, not just what the model was trained on. If the scenario mentions private documents, frequently changing information, or the need for cited resources, RAG is almost always the right call. A big part of AI are agents. Agents are not just a fancy chatbot. They are for tasks where the system needs to decide what to do next. For example, call APIs, use tools, and keep track of context across multiple steps. You need to make sure you know when agents are necessary, or where a simple prompt would do, and vice versa. The key question is always, does this task need autonomy or multi-step decision-making? If yes, you might opt to go with an agent. Before you go into the development process, you need to deploy some Azure resources. This is the Foundry resource model, and it is worth understanding. At the top, you have got Foundry resources that provide compute and storage. Inside, those projects give you isolated workspaces. And within projects you work with, 4 things you need to know: models, agent, tools, and knowledge. If you ever feel lost, come back to this mental model. Almost every question maps to one of these 4. And although this is not an Azure administration or architect course, architecture and high availability questions might show up on the exam. You need to understand the baseline Foundry architecture, how projects connect to services like AI search, storage, the key vault, and what multi-region deployment looks like. For example, do you know what each of these resources is responsible for? Hub versus project versus connection, for example. Can you manage your Azure resources, included but not limited to access and network? Make sure you learn those concepts. Security and access is not glamorous when we're on the topic of AI, but it is equally important. The big takeaway here is to prefer managed identities and role-based access control, or RBAC, over API keys whenever possible. And when you do use keys, store them in Azure Key Vault, not your code. Make sure you know the best practices, not just the options. Also, don't forget to review how key regeneration works and when to do it. There are 2 main authentication paths for Foundry resources. Microsoft Entra ID with managed identities is the enterprise choice for complex role-based access control scenarios. API keys are simpler but less secure. There are different scenarios where each one is appropriate, so think about it in terms of the security requirements described in this scenario. Monitor your AI systems is part of being a responsible operator. Make sure you know how to track token consumption for cost analysis, view your evaluation metrics over time, and use Azure Monitor to drill into traces when something breaks. For example, if I describe a performance issue, can you think of what tool or metric you would look at first? Responsible AI is not just nice to have on this exam, it is a real domain. You need to know all 6 principles: fairness, inclusiveness, transparency, reliability and safety, accountability, and privacy and security. But more importantly, you need to know how to apply them in a scenario. For example, reliability and safety in an autonomous vehicle means safeguarding human life. But on a social app, it means reliable response and maximum uptime, no matter the user traffic. And responsible AI does not stop there. Azure AI Content Safety is your go-to service for catching harmful content, both from users and from your AI models. You need to be able to describe practical use cases when presented with a scenario. For example, filtering user prompts, moderating AI outputs, and protecting platforms like marketplaces or gaming environments. know what content safety does, and when to deploy it. Content safety has multiple options and configurations. This is where you get hands-on with content safety. Filters and block lists are your main tools, but do you know how to get severity thresholds and create custom block lists to block specific content types? It is a very practical skill, so if you can, try these out in the portal before the exam. As our tools become smarter, so are the malicious actors. Prompt shields and harm detection are your defense against prompt injection attacks. There are two types: direct user attacks and indirect, hidden in documents, for example. The harm detection system scores content across 4 categories: hate, sexual, violence, and self-harm, with severity levels from 0 to 7. However, while the underlying scale is 0 to 7, the return severity values for text are 0, 2, 4, and 6, for safe, low, medium, and high accordingly. And before we wrap Domain 1, here are a few more skills to have in your back pocket. It's useful to know how to create AI resources, how to deploy model, how to set up endpoints, and how to write up a CI/CD pipeline. And it's important to know how to design a responsible AI governance framework. This might not be your main focus, but might show up as a supporting question, so don't overlook them. You should now feel confident on choosing the right Foundry services, setting up your AI environment, securing and monitoring it, and implementing responsible AI. If any of these feel not sure for you, just go back, review the relevant Microsoft Learn modules before moving forward with the next domain. Welcome to Domain 2, and this is a big one. Implementing generative AI and agentic solutions accounts for 30 to 35% of the exam. It's the largest single domain. If you're going to deep dive anywhere, this is the place. It covers building with Foundry, creating agents, and optimizing everything for production. Here is the full skill list for Domain 2. It is a lot, and that is because this domain carries the most weight in the exam. You need to know how to deploy models, build RAG pipelines, design agent workflows, integrate tools to run evaluations, and optimize prompts. Every single skill here can appear as an exam question, so don't treat this as a nice to have. Make sure it's a priority in your list. Let us talk about the Foundry platform layout. Azure OpenAI resources give you access to the latest models. Projects are where you build and test your apps with enterprise security built in. And the Management Center is your admin hub for configuring hubs, projects, and connections. The exam may test your understanding on how these 3 pieces fit together, so make sure you know how to navigate scenario questions confidently. Model deployment management is the foundation of generative AI. Make sure for the exam you review the different deployment options and licenses for models. Models are being updated faster than ever before. Remember, when it comes to update policies, there are 3. Beam to a specific version, auto update to default, or upgrade when expired. Each has trade-offs between stability and staying current. So when a question asks about keeping models up to date or preventing downtime from retirements, these policies are probably your answer. RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, is one of the most important patterns on the entire exam. This slide shows the full pipeline. Chunk your documents, enrich and embed the chunks, store them in Azure AI Search, and orchestrate retrieval with Azure OpenAI. You might get questions from every part, from the chunking strategy to embedding model choice, to hybrid search and re-ranking. Familiarize yourself with this flow and make sure you can answer relative questions on options and configuration. There are a lot of model benchmarks that outline what the best model is in general. That evaluation is how you prove your AI actually works well for your use case. There are different things that you might need, so make sure you remember them for the exam. You're going to need a test dataset in CSV or JSON-L formats and an Azure OpenAI connection. The 3 evaluation targets are model and prompt or dataset, and prompt flow. Make sure you know how to pick the right evaluation approach and understand the built-in metrics for things like relevance. You will work, for example, in a Foundry project that works and includes the appropriate permissions/roles. Here's where code meets the exam. Pre-prepared for any Python-related questions. For example, this is how you connect your app to a Foundry project. You need a connection string and the default Azure credential for authentication. This code pattern is fundamental, so understand each line. The exam might show you a similar snippet and ask what is missing or what to change. You might even see a drop-down on the code snippet to choose the appropriate function. This can be especially challenging, so make sure you do your best to have your bases covered. This is where things get crucial. Prompt engineering techniques help make your solution better and can be tested on the exam. Good prompts follow a structure: system message for behavior, user message for the task, and context for retrieved evidence. Do not overthink it, make sure you know the anatomy, not whether you can write the world's best prompt. If a question shows you a broken prompt, look for which of these 3 pieces is missing or poorly defined. These 4 prompt techniques are your toolkit to improving your AI output quality. Few short examples need consistency, structured instructions eliminate ambiguity, and context-first prompting ensures the model has facts before generating. Iterative refinement is about testing and improvement. Practice this and know them before you take the exam. And now some variables that greatly control the model consistency. Temperature, max tokens, and sampling controls are the knobs you turn to shape the model behavior. Low temperature for factual and consistent answers, high temperature for creative ones. Max tokens controls length and cost. If you get a question or a scenario in the exam where outputs are too random or too short, these settings might be your answer. And when we have done our best with prompt engineering, we might need to take it one step further. Fine-tuning is powerful but expensive, and it's important that you know the trade-offs. It goes beyond what prompt engineering alone can do, but it requires training data, compute time, and cost. The key exam skill is knowing when fine-tuning is justified versus when a well-crafted prompt or RAG setup would get you the same results for less efforts. And all of these skills are put to the test with agents. Agents bring autonomy and flexibility that traditional AI models do not have. Instead of just answering one question, agents can carry out multi-step tasks on their own. Can you name a real-world scenario across healthcare, energy, and travel where an agent is the right solution? Think about whether the task needs ongoing decision-making tool to use and context retention. It is very important, as the exam might test this extensively. Setting up agent resources is where architecture meets practice. Basic setup uses Microsoft Managed multi-tenant resources, quick and easy, but less control. Standard setup uses your own single-tenant resources with full visibility over the underlying Azure resources, but more responsibility. Make sure you know this distinction before you take the exam. This diagram breaks down very easily what an agent actually is: an LLM plus instructions plus tools, taking input and producing outputs. Simple concept, but it is your blueprint of what you need to do. If an exam question asks what makes an agent different from a plain chat completion call, the answer is tools and instructions working together with the model. The agent's playground is your prototyping sandbox. No code needed, just configure your agent, test different prompts, and iterate. This is your starting point for agent development. You should experiment here first, then move to code when you're ready to deploy. Testing, optimizing, and deploying an agent is a full life cycle. You interact with the agent in the playground, evaluate its behavior, tune its responses, and then deploy to production. Make sure you understand what happens at each stage and what tools are available for optimization, as you might get a use case in the exam and you would have to make the choice between these stages. And the UI can only take you so far. For more complex scenarios, further development might be needed. The Microsoft Agent Framework is the open source backbone for building multi-agent systems. It supports function tools, MCP integration, OpenAPI, and hosted tools like code interpreter, file search, and web search. Make sure for the exam you know its tool type and its category, and when to use the options it provides. And for multi-agent orchestration, whether sequential, concurrent, or handoff, know the patterns and how they apply for different scenarios and use cases. And before I move on, I want to clarify the distinction between the Microsoft Agent Framework and the Foundry Agent Service. This can be a real gotcha on the exam. So think of the Microsoft Agent Framework as the developer toolkit. It's the SDK you use to design and orchestrate agents and code. Full control over workflows, tools, and behavior. In contrast, the Foundry Agent Service is the enterprise runtime. It hosts, scales, and secures, and monitors these agents in production with built-in governance, identity, and observability. Let us review agent tools that we have available for our agents. File search uses vector retrieval over uploaded documents. Code interpreter runs Python in a sandbox for calculations and data work. Azure AI Search connects agents to your enterprise indexes, and it can help you implement RAG. If you can match the capability to the requirement, you'll be one step closer to passing your exam. There is no talk of agents without MCP or Model Context Protocol. MCP is how agents discover and call tools in a standardized way. No more ad hoc integration. It allows agents to connect once and access many tools easily and dynamically. Most popular services already expose MCP servers, and you can also create your own. Foundry supports it natively, so you can attach MCP servers for language, analysis, speed, search, and custom APIs. For the exam, make sure you understand MCP as the standard for tool integration and how agents can use it at runtime. Multi-agent orchestration is about coordinating multiple agents. Keep a scenario in mind for each of these patterns. For example, sequential for chain tasks, concurrent for parallel work, and also remember the safeguards, as they can be tested in the exam. For example, approval gates, scope constraints, and human-in-the-loop checkpoints. Keep things safe. An agent also requires knowledge, as the model knowledge is limited. Foundry IQ is a managed knowledge service that pulls in data from SharePoint, databases, files, and so on, and makes it available to agents through MCP. Here, something that could be asked in the exam is that we can use MCP as a built-in citation and grounding. So answers come with sources. Foundry IQ is the answer when agents need structured access to enterprise knowledge with attribution. In this section, we talked about building generative apps, building agents with tools and orchestration, and optimizing with prompt engineering and observability. This is the highest weighted domain. So if anything here feels unclear, go back and review. The time you invest here will be reflected on how well you do on exam day. So we're now entering domain 3, computer vision solutions. These cover image and video generation, multimodal understanding, and responsible AI for visual content. It is 10 to 15% of the exam. Although it is a smaller domain, the questions can be very specific, so do not skip the details. Every question counts in the exam, and some of these options can be even combined in solutions with other domains. Here's the full skills list for domain 3. It goes through image generation, video generation, content understanding pipelines, and a lot more. It is a wide range, so it's important to focus on knowing which service or approach to use for each task. Not every item will appear in your exam, but any of them could. Let's start with images. Image generation models create visuals from text description. These use neural network-based generation. You describe what you want, and you specify content and style, and then it improves accuracy. It is a practical skill, so if you can, try generating some images in the playground to experiment before the exam, as this will make it easier for you to answer the questions. Going a bit deeper on image generation, you need to know the API endpoints, supported image sizes, and quality settings, as these might be asked very specifically on an exam question. Reference image generation, for example, takes an existing image plus a prompt to create variation. And generation controls like content filters, style parameters, and resolution settings are equally important. Make sure you know how to configure these and what options you have there. Video generation is also available through the Foundry Model Catalog. You deploy a model, test it in the playground, and can even use the SDK programmatically. Key parameters to remember for the exam are duration, resolution, and aspect ratio. This is a newer area generally, so focus on understanding the end-to-end workflow from model deployment to retrieving the generated video, as any of these parts might be asked in a question. Visual Q&A and caption generation use multi-model models like GPT-4o. So you send an image plus the question, and the model reasons about both. It is good to know how to structure the API request with both inputs and understand the difference between short captions and detailed descriptions. A nice skill to have that might be tested in the exam is how to generate accessibility compliant alt text, for example. Content Understanding in Foundry Tools is your multimodal analysis engine. It handles images, documents, audio, and video. The three capabilities you need to know for the exam are AI-powered extraction, pre-built and custom analyzers, and single or few-shot schema training. If you get a question about processing diverse content types into structured outputs, this might be part of the answer. This slide shows content understanding in action, analyzing an image and producing a structured summary. Make sure you understand that this is how you extract visual characteristics and turn them into data that downstream applications or agents can use. If you get a question of the exam, make sure you remember that it bridges the gap between unstructured visual content and structured information. And responsible AI for visual content is also important for the exam. Content filters can block harmful image outputs. You can configure severity thresholds and block lists at the deployment level. And here's a big one. Prompt injection via images is a real threat. Attackers can embed text instructions in images to manipulate the model. And although this is not a security exam, security right now is everywhere, especially AI. So make sure you know these things before you take the exam. In this section, we talked about image and video generation, multimodal understanding, including captioning and visual Q&A, and content safety for visual outputs. This domain for the exam is compact, but can have tricky, detail-oriented questions. So don't underestimate it. The fourth domain is all about text analysis solution. This covers language model, text analysis, and speech capabilities. It is 10 to 15% of the exam. The key challenge here is knowing when to use the built-in Azure AI services versus an LLM-based approach for the same task. Here is the full list of skills tested for the exam. You can start with entity extraction, sentiment detection, and so on. Both the Azure Services and Tools approach and the LLM approach might be tested here, so you need to understand the strengths and trade-offs of each. Prepare yourself to be presented with a scenario and ask whether you would use Azure Language, Azure Translator, Azure Speech, or an LLM workflow. Speech carries equal weight to text analysis here, so do not neglect it. And watch out for hybrid scenarios that combine text analysis with agents or RAG pipelines. Entity extraction and summarization are bread and butter natural language processing or NLP skills. Azure AI Language gives you pre-built NER, key phrase instruction, and sentiment analysis. But LLMs can do the same. But the output is structured as JSON. For the exam, do not overlook the details or configuration settings. For example, know the difference between extractive summarization, which selects existing sentences, and abstractive summarization, which generates new text. Translation comes in two flavors. Azure Translator handles 100+ languages and is the go-to for bulk or real-time needs. LLM translation is better when tone, nuance, and domain context matter. So for the exam, know that you can train custom translator models with domain-specific terminology for individual translation needs. For example, domains like finance, tech, and healthcare. Azure AI Speech covers real-time transcription, batch transcription, custom speech models for noisy environments, and neural text-to-speech with custom voices. For the exam, it is important that you understand the setup. For example, speech configuration, endpoint configuration, authentication with either Entra ID or API keys. These are practical configuration level details that are important to know and can be tested in the exam. Integrating speech into agents is where things get exciting. The Voice Live API enables real-time voice conversations with agents through the Foundry Agent Service. And multimodal models can reason over audio directly. So we go from simple speech to building voice-enabled agent experiences. So know when to use each different tool and API when it comes to giving a voice to your agents. And let's not forget speech translation. Speech translation has two patterns: real-time translation, which goes through speech recognition, then translation. And for pre-recorded audio, use batch transcription plus Azure Translator. There are multiple APIs, so multiple combinations can work together seamlessly in a complete solution. So when you're faced with a question like this in the exam, make sure you weigh the pros and cons of each service. This is where MCP meets text and speech analysis. Azure Language and Speech MCP servers expose analysis tools as agent callable capabilities. You can deploy the Foundry Agent Service, attach MCP servers, and define when the agents should invoke each tool. This pattern is really important to know for the exam, as it lets agents detect PII, analyze sentiment, transcribe calls, and take action, all within a single workflow. In this section, we talked about text analysis, including image extraction, sentiment, and translation, and speech solutions, covering transcription, synthesis, custom models, and agent interaction. Both sub-areas here carry equal weight in the exam, so balance your prep time accordingly. Last but not least, Domain 5 covers information extraction solutions, specifically building retrieval and grounding pipelines and extracting content from documents. It is 10 to 15% of the exam. Azure AI Search is important and very dominant here, so make sure you know it very well. But don't overlook document content extraction solutions either. Here's the full skill list tested in the exam for this domain. You can see starting with ingesting and indexing content, configuring semantic, hybrid, and vector search, and so on. This domain ties together a lot of concepts from the earlier domains that can be tested in the exam, so it is a great capstone. Azure AI Search is central to this domain. Understanding the full indexing pipeline is important for the exam, starting with document cracking, field mapping, skill set execution, output field mappings, and pushing into the index. For the exam, make sure you know the different index attributes, for example, searchable, filterable, and so on. And remember the skill set rules: unique name, at least one skill, with the maximum skills vary between different tiers. Although you might think that AI search is only for RAG, remember that it is also a powerful service that can support big data solutions, regardless of other generative AI solutions. So for the exam, make sure you look at the use case or scenario you're given to see if AI search is still the right choice, even if it doesn't use generative AI. Data sources and indexers are the way to get data into your index. Supported sources include Azure Storage, Cosmos DB, Azure SQL, and more. Know the difference between push indexing and pull indexing, as this can be part of a question. The exam might describe a data source and ask how to configure the ingestion pipeline. And the best part is that skills in AI search can be customized to do, well, anything. Custom skills extend the indexing pipeline with your own logic. The key parameters are URI and key for authentication, resource ID for token authentication, timeout, and degree of parallelism, for example. For the exam, understand how skill inputs and outputs map to the enrichment pipeline. Do you know how you can wire up a custom skill correctly with the skill sets? If not, review the content before you get in the exam. And then comes the index and your queries. Querying uses Lucene syntax with 4 stages: parsing, lexical analysis, document retrieval, and scoring. For the exam, make sure you know the difference between simple syntax for basic matches and full syntax for complex queries. You might be asked to identify errors in a query or how to halt filtering, sorting, or wildcards. Before you take the exam, practice writing a few queries to build confidence. On top of that, Azure AI Search leverages vectors. Semantic and vector search take retrieval to the next level. Make sure you know how to define vector fields with dimensions and a vector search profile in the index schema. Semantic search uses AI to re-rank results for relevance, so it is important to know how to set up semantic configurations in the portal. These are complementary capabilities, but they can be combined with other services, so keep that in mind for the exam. Integrated vectorization is a great benefit. It lets Azure AI Search automatically chunk documents and generate embeddings at indexing time, so no custom pipeline needed. So remember, for the exam, you just specify the embedding model and connection into the index definition. If you get a question that asks about simplifying RAG ingestion into a single pipeline, this might be a possible answer. Now let's talk about images and text. OCR with Document Intelligence extracts text from images, PDFs, and Office documents at higher resolution than Azure AI Vision. It can handle printed and handwritten text and powers pre-built models for invoices, receipts, IDs, and so much more. For the exam, it is important to know when to use Document Intelligence versus other extraction methods, like content understanding. It is the default method for document processing capabilities. Document layout analysis distinguishes geometric roles like text, tables, and figures from logical roles like titles and headings. This is an example of how you give structure to raw document contents. For the exam, make sure you understand what layout analysis feeds into the broader information extraction pipeline and how it helps downstream processes like RAG and agent knowledge retrieval. So to accomplish the previously mentioned task, you can also utilize content understanding. Creating a content understanding analyzer is a 4-step process. For the exam, make sure you know all of these steps. Start with a Foundry project, define a schema based on content samples, build the analyzer, and use it to extract fields. Sometimes this can also be the right choice compared to other extraction tools. And don't forget, content understanding processes not only documents but images, videos, audio into clean, structured outputs. So for the exam, think of it as the universal intake pipeline for diverse content types. So if your scenario looks for diverse content understanding might be the answer. After this section, you should be comfortable with building, retrieval, and grounding pipelines using Azure AI Search and extracting content from documents using OCR, layout analysis, and content understanding. These exam skills round all 5 exam domains. Now, you should know exactly what to focus on before you sit for the AI-103 exam. You have seen the 5 objective domains, the key topics within each, and the kinds of details that show up on test day. Before you schedule your exam, make sure you take advantage of the exam sandbox. It gives you a feel for the interface and question format, so there are no surprises. Also, do not skip the free practice assessment available right on the exam page. It is one of the best ways to gauge your readiness and pinpoint any last areas that need attention. You have the roadmap, now go put it to work and earn that Azure AI Apps and Agents Developer Associate certification. Thank you for joining us and good luck! You got this!